As we reached the middle of July on the first coast, the thunderstorm season really began to heat up. During the third week of the month, a consistent southwesterly flow would help form an equally consistent weather pattern. From July 15th to the 17th, North Florida and southern Georgia would experience quite the active set of thunderstorm days, with plenty of strong thunderstorms and heavy rain. But for whatever reason, thunderstorm activity was pretty sparse locally in Clay County. That would start to change on July 18th, however, where we finally had a thunderstorm move over our area. In addition to local thunderstorms, widespread strong to severe thunderstorms would occur over much of the First Coast region in both Florida and Georgia. As mentioned earlier, the First Coast and North Florida overall had been set in a pretty consistent weather pattern leading up to July 18th. Over the prior 3 days, strong southwesterly flow over the region led to the Gulf sea breeze remaining dominant. Each day played out relatively similar to the last, where the Gulf sea breeze would push showers and embedded thunderstorms from the Big Bend into the First Coast region early in the daytime, typically around noon to 1 p.m. The Gulf sea breeze would then slam into the Atlantic sea breeze, which was continually pinned along the Interstate 95 corridor east of the St. Johns River. This would usually lead to the biggest thunderstorms of each day occurring in the coastal counties such as Duval, St. Johns, Nassau, and Flagler. While it was not completely dry in Clay County during the prior 3 days, we did not see many thunderstorms. We may have gotten a quick downpour along the initial wave of Gulf sea breeze showers, but again, most of the thunderstorm action stayed away from our area. July 18th was slightly different, however. Looking at the morning area forecast discussion, we were in for much of the same as the past 3 days. Strong southwesterly flow would help shove the Gulf sea breeze far along into the First Coast region, where it would once again collide with a mostly pinned Atlantic sea breeze. Widespread severe weather was not expected across the First Coast region, with the Storm Prediction Center having our region under a general thunderstorm risk for the day. The morning area forecast discussion did mention the likelihood of seeing some strong thunderstorms, with only isolated severe thunderstorm activity being expected. Excessive rainfall and flooding was not expected over our portion of Florida, as the strong atmospheric flow would contribute to quick storm motion. This would help ensure that storms did not train or stall over one area for too long. The atmosphere was fairly unstable for this time of year, with surface-based Cape values ranging from 3,000 to 4,000 during the early parts of the afternoon. Values would quickly begin to dwindle towards the early evening, ranging from around 1,000 to 2,000, which likely contributed to the earlier end of thunderstorms in the region compared to previous examples we've seen over the summer. Mixed layer Cape was sufficient enough for thunderstorms, generally ranging from 1,000 to 2,000 across North Florida. While both surface-based and mixed layer Cape values were not incredibly high compared to other summer days, this was still more than enough to help spawn quite a few robust thunderstorms. Being the middle of July, it was another hot and humid day on the First Coast, with temperatures at home briefly reaching 100 degrees. With dew points ranging from around 77 to 82 during the afternoon hours, heat index values would reach close to 120 degrees. Helping to contribute to both thunderstorms and those heat indices were the high levels of atmospheric moisture. Precipitable water values generally range from around 1.9 to 2.2 during the afternoon, meaning the stage was set for heavy rainfall. With all of these ingredients set in place, it was once again a matter of seeing where thunderstorms would fire during the afternoon hours. The first signs of thunderstorm activity began to roll on shore of the Big Bend region around 10:30 a.m. It would take until around 12:30 in the afternoon for thunderstorms to start crossing over the I-75 corridor, with the first special weather statement of the day being issued in Marion County at 1:16 p.m. By this time, the Gulf sea breeze was starting to be shoved further along through inland North Florida, assisted by outflow from another strong thunderstorm to the north. This storm was given a special weather statement at 1:25 p.m. and would mainly affect Baker County and Charlton County in southern Georgia. An extremely brief thunderstorm would pop up to the south of downtown Jacksonville, which was given a special weather statement at 1:44 p.m., with the main threat being 40-mile-per-hour wind gusts. This storm right here is the prime example of a pulse thunderstorm, as it was barely around for 30 minutes. However, you could tell the storm was producing some pretty good wind gusts, as outflow can be seen shooting out in all directions around it as it weakened. The storm that was previously moving through Baker County was beginning to move into Charlton County, Georgia, around 2 p.m. when it was given yet another special weather statement. This storm would continue to maintain its strength, getting a third special weather statement just after 3 p.m. as it was moving over northwestern Nassau County. This storm is likely beginning to weaken towards 3:30 p.m., however, as it pushed an outflow boundary out to its southeast. This coincided with the sea breeze merger, which occurred around 3:45 p.m. This would be the main kicker to get thunderstorms started around the First Coast for the day. When the sea breezes met, thunderstorms would explode in intensity. Over the next 2 hours, numerous strong and even severe thunderstorms would form in the wake of the sea breeze collision. But before I talk about those thunderstorms, I want to talk about what was occurring in Clay County. While in terms of intensity, the singular storm we saw was significantly less notable, it was the only storm I was able to see lightning from on this day. So before we talk about the severe weather the First Coast saw, let's take a brief detour to cover what was going on near home. Towards 4 p.m., a thunderstorm was beginning to approach the southwestern corner of Clay County. With this in mind, we headed down the road to get in position. It would take only a few minutes after we got set up, but the rain began to fall and the wind started to pick up.
see that, but that sounded close.
After a few minutes of watching the rain fall, the thunder started to get much closer.
Jesus. I'm not seeing these, but we're hearing them. Someone might be intensifying now.
After a particularly loud crack of thunder, I decided to turn the camera a little bit more to the right, and I'm glad I did that because less than 2 minutes later, we saw a really close lightning bolt.
Yes. That the one I saw that was over there. That looked like that was probably within 5 miles. I really hope the camera got that one because that was 2 bolts. Oh my god. Probably soon. That was very clean. That's how you know it was close. Yeah, no, that just showed up. That looks like that was, at least according to radar, that was 1.3 miles away.
Unfortunately, after that one really good lightning strike, not much else came from the storm. The storm was already on a bit of a weakening trend as it was approaching us, and that only continued as the storm moved overhead. Looking at the echo tops, the storm was already not looking particularly formidable on its approach, but by the time it moved overhead, most of the higher cloud tops had already dissipated. What you just saw was a majority of our interesting weather for the day. Another downpour would try to move over our area a few hours later, but nothing notable came of it. With our local storm for the day out of the way, we can get back to looking at the admittedly more notable thunderstorms that occurred on July 18th in other parts of the First Coast, and there was quite a lot of them. Around 4 p.m., thunderstorms were beginning to explode over the coastal counties of our area in the wake of the Seabreeze merger. At 3:48 p.m., a long line of thunderstorms was stretching from just north of Clay County all the way up through Camden County in Georgia. This line was given a special weather statement, which was issued for 6 different counties, covering an area populated by over 1 million people. This storm also seemed to be a bit stronger than other ones that had formed up until this point in the day, with the outline threat being 50-mile-per-hour wind gusts instead of 40. This line would continue to grow wider over the next half hour while moving eastward, with another special weather statement issued on the linear cluster at 4:17 p.m., with the same hazards being outlined in this alert as the last one. This was also around the time that severe thunderstorm warnings began to be issued on certain portions of this linear cluster. The first segment to be warned was on the southern tip of the line, affecting southeastern Duval County. The primary threat was for a 60-mile-per-hour wind gust. Around 10 minutes later, after the Duval severe alert, another one was issued towards the northern portion of the linear cluster, affecting Nassau and Camden counties along the Florida-Georgia border. The line would continue to move towards the beaches of Duval and Nassau counties towards 5 p.m. At 4:54 p.m., another severe thunderstorm warning was issued for eastern Duval and northeastern St. Johns counties. Notably, penny-sized hail was also an added threat compared to the last 2 severe thunderstorm warnings issued on the line. As the main cluster of severe thunderstorms began to work offshore, outflow from the storms would collide with what was left of the Atlantic sea breeze. This would lead to another round of robust thunderstorms, with some of them being severe. Another special weather statement was issued for a large cluster of thunderstorms at 5:38 p.m., affecting southeastern Duval and northern St. Johns counties. This alert had numerous threats attached to it, ranging from strong wind gusts, excessive cloud-to-ground lightning, and minor flooding potential. To the south of this storm, another strong thunderstorm was bubbling up in the southern portions of St. Johns County. At 5:49 p.m., this storm was given its own special weather statement, with the threat being 40-mile-per-hour wind gusts. However, a severe thunderstorm warning was quickly issued on this storm only 5 minutes later. In addition to 60-mile-per-hour wind gusts, the alert mentions the potential for penny-sized hail. At 6:20 p.m., yet another severe thunderstorm warning was issued on a new storm that had popped up in between the 2 previously mentioned storms in St. Johns County. Again, the outlined threats were 60-mile-per-hour wind gusts and penny-sized hail. While all of this was happening, outflow had been shooting off the backsides of these thunderstorms back to the west of the St. Johns River. This outflow would interact with some heavy downpours that were moving over Clay County, however did not lead to any intensification. In fact, these downpours began to collapse and produce their own outflow boundaries by the time 6:30 p.m. rolled around. By this time, a majority of the strong thunderstorms that were impacting the coastal counties of the First Coast had begun to move offshore. However, this was not the end of thunderstorm activity in the viewing area. Outflow from these thunderstorms was still moving through southern portions of St. Johns and into Putnam counties. The final strong thunderstorm St. Johns County would see for the evening would be given a special weather statement at 6:50 p.m. However, this storm was relatively weaker compared to what had occurred over the past 2 hours. The last hotspot for thunderstorms on the First Coast that evening occurred in far southern portions of our viewing area, mainly in Putnam and Marion counties. These counties had not seen as much rain or thunderstorm activity during the day, meaning there was not much subsidence within the atmosphere. Though it's a bit hard to see due to these areas being far from the KJAX radar, outflow from previous storms was still influencing the development of thunderstorms further south. Starting at 7:28 p.m., the first in a set of 4 special weather statements would be issued on a particularly persistent cluster of thunderstorms. What I find notable about this cluster was its slow movement compared to the other storms of the day, and how it maintained its strength for quite a while. In the first 3 alerts issued on this storm cluster, it mentions that it is simply drifting in a direction, or nearly stationary. That's notable because usually these alerts will give a direction and an estimated forward movement speed. While I have seen a few storms say they're stationary or nearly stationary, I think this is the first time I've seen an alert use the drifting phrasing, indicating extremely slow movement. By the time the last special weather statement was issued at 8:53, there was only 1 thunderstorm left out of the cluster. The threat was for 40-mile-per-hour wind gusts, and it was now drifting southward at 5 miles per hour. The final set of special weather statements was issued on a cluster of thunderstorms that was creeping northward through Marion County. Marion County is on the extreme southwestern portions of the coverage area for NWS Jacksonville, and with these storms being so far away, the radar imagery is a bit fuzzier than usual. Nonetheless, I want to talk about this cluster because similarly to the cluster in Putnam County, it was extremely persistent, especially for it getting towards sundown. However, unlike the cluster in Putnam County, this one was actually moving at a decent speed and was intensifying over the course of its 4 special weather statements. The first alert for this cluster was issued at 8:36 p.m., with the primary threat being for 40-mile-per-hour wind gusts. Notice how the alert is not covering any of the heavy portions of the storm. That's because the storm was currently over Lake and Orange counties, which are covered by the National Weather Service office in Melbourne, not NWS Jacksonville. This line was given its own special weather statement at 8:28 by NWS Melbourne, with the threats being 40-mile-per-hour wind gusts and penny-sized hail. The penny-sized hail was noticeably missing on the special weather statement issued by NWS Jacksonville on the northern portion of the storm. By 9 p.m., much of the southern portion of this cluster of storms had begun to weaken. However, the northern portion, which had now moved into eastern Marion County, was beginning to intensify. At 8:59 p.m., the second special weather statement for the storm was issued. In addition to 40-mile-per-hour wind gusts, frequent lightning and heavy rainfall were also noted as hazards. About 10 minutes later, a third special weather statement was issued. This was before the expiration of the second alert and was likely due to the storm intensifying further. In this alert, the wind gust threat was bumped up to 45 to 55 mile per hour, along with excessive cloud-to-ground lightning being noted. Lastly, pea-sized hail was also added as a hazard. The final weather statement on this cluster, and for the day overall, was issued at 9:38 p.m. The storm was still rather formidable, with the outlined threats being 50-mile-per-hour wind gusts and excessive cloud-to-ground lightning. The storm would finally begin to fizzle out towards 10 p.m. as calm conditions finally settled in across most of our region. July 18th wound up being one of the more active thunderstorm days across our region in the summer of 2024. Despite having a similar setup to the prior 3 days, there was a significantly higher amount of severe thunderstorms. There was a combined 7 severe thunderstorm warnings between July 15th to the 17th. On July 18th alone, there was 8 different severe thunderstorm warnings. In terms of strong thunderstorms, there were 21 special weather statements issued on July 18th. The prior 3 days were fairly active in this regard, with the 15th, 16th, and 17th seeing 21, 8, and 31 special weather statements respectively. Despite the large amount of strong to severe thunderstorms on July 18th, there was surprisingly little reports of damage or severe strength weather, such as hail exceeding 1 inch in diameter or wind gusts in excess of 58 miles per hour. The only report of damage from our area came out of Glenn County, Georgia. Here, there was some minor tree damage, but more notably, some roof shingles were blown off of at least one home. On top of that, the metal roof of a building was partially blown off. When it came to the rainfall totals on July 18th, the hotspots were fairly spread out. Noticeably, much of the First Coast region west of the St. Johns River was dry or received very little rainfall. The exception to that was in 2 small pockets in western Clay County, bordering on Bradford County. Here, around 1 to 1.5 inches of rain fell. The second, much larger swath of heavy rainfall occurred over eastern Duval County and parts of northern St. Johns County. The areas in magenta indicate around 2 to 2.5 inches of rainfall. This area is much more widespread compared to the last and upcoming examples, with much of eastern Duval receiving quite the soaking. Lastly, we have a cluster of higher totals ranging from southern St. Johns County through much of east central and southeastern Putnam County. Here, multiple areas reach 2.5 inches of rainfall, with some exceeding 3 inches. It is worth noting that these areas are quite far away from the KJAX radar site, which could lead to the radar overestimating the amount of rain that fell. This is because the radar gets its total from the reflectivity scans of the area rather than official on-the-ground measurements. However, considering Putnam County had that extremely slow-moving thunderstorm that lasted over an hour and a half, it's not hard to believe that these totals are accurate. I hope you enjoyed my analysis of the thunderstorms we saw both in person and generally around the First Coast on July 18th. What I personally found interesting was the large influence that outflow had on storm development after the Seabreeze merger. Once the initial wave of thunderstorms moved offshore Duval and St. Johns counties, storm development almost seemed to chase after the outflow, with storms moving in the opposite direction of which they initially developed. This phenomenon isn't unique to today, but I always find it incredibly interesting when it happens. Overall, it was quite the active day, and the days following would continue this hot streak, with multiple vicious thunderstorms making it close to home, but that's for next time. Thank you for watching this far. If you enjoyed this video, consider leaving a like and subscribing if you haven't already. It lets us know that you enjoy what we do here, and it helps our videos reach a wider audience. Thanks again for watching, and we hope to see you in the next one.